In this video, we're going to be looking at the 7Artisans 25mm f1.8 lens for APC and Micro Four Thirds cameras. Join me, roll titles. Well, hi YouTube, Brian James, I'm Micro Four Thirds guy with you once again. And in this video, I'm going to be doing a quick review of the 7Artisans 25mm f1.8 fully manual lens for APS-C and Micro Four Thirds cameras. And I'll just grab my screen down here. It's designed to fit, I shall quote it off the screen, E mount, EOS M mount, Micro Four Thirds and FX mount. So we cover Canon, Fuji and of course a Micro Four Thirds mount. And I've been loaned this one from a very good friend of mine, and just to give it a go. And this video is going to be put out primarily onto my Patreon channel first. So if you're a Patreon viewer, you'll see this, and it'll be out in a little while later on the on YouTube. So if you want to see these sort of videos when they first come out, consider having a look down in the description below, and you'll find that there's a link to my Patreon channel, 2 different levels that you can go for, and if you go for the higher level, then you're going to see these videos sooner. And also, if you'd like to support the channel just by a one-off payment, there is of course a little PayPal link below as well if you want to. However, let's have a look at this lens. Well, I've been loaned this, as I say, this lens, so this isn't a sponsored video, although I have had a sponsored video from both 7Artisans and TT Artisans in the past, both manufacturers of fully manual budget sort of level lenses. Now this one's up on the 7Artisans site at the moment for $69, and for that sort of price it really is actually very good value for money, but it does have its flaws, and I'll tell you about them a little bit later. But let's get it out the way with the specs first of all, shall we? So as I say, it's an APS-C or Micro Four Thirds mount for EOS M, Micro Four Thirds and Fuji FX mounts as well. And comes in, it's about 143-ish grams. It's not particularly heavy lens, it's not lightweight either, but it's not silly heavy lens. Very, very solid construction, all metal construction on the outside, which is nice to see. And it has as similar on some of the other lenses of this sort of class, it has the clickless aperture ring, so there's no click to let you know when you're on or out of different apertures. Now, sometimes I like this, sometimes I don't. Personally, for using fully manual lenses, I don't like it. And the reason is, when I've got a lens to my eye, and I'm using a fully manual lens, I've got no feedback in my viewfinder to say what my aperture is set to. And it's very easy to knock the aperture as well. So what I tend to like is, if I've got the aperture and I know how many clicks it is between the different aperture settings, then I can very easily just change it to what I want purely from memory. And I know if I want to be on 5.6, I know how many clicks to take to say 5.6 or f8 or whatever it is like that. Well, with this being continuously variable, yes, it does give you an accuracy if you want that degree of accuracy, but I've never really shot to that degree of accuracy aperture wise. Very, very good if you're doing stuff from a movie point of view, but from a stills camera I just find it difficult. And the other thing for me is it's too easy to knock it. So you can imagine you're sitting on, say, f8, but you've actually caught the ring and taken it around to f2 or f4 or whatever it is, or down to f16, and you've got no real way of knowing unless you take your eye away from the camera. So let's have a look at some of the other specs on this. As I said, declicked aperture ring. The aperture goes from f1.8 to f16, so it's not the smallest aperture, if you like, the most closed down aperture. A lot of lenses are going down as far as f22, so if you, in particular bright light situations, you might get a bit of a problem on that. But overall, good range of apertures on there. And I've taken a few photographs, which I'll let you see at the end, which I've done some on different aperture values just to let you see. Personally, I've seen very, very little difference between fully open and fully closed. Yes, there is a slight difference, but it's actually very, very consistent across the whole of the aperture range, which I found really, really good for a lens of this price and this sort of class. It has, as I said, a 25mm focal length. It will focus down to 0.18 of a meter out to infinity. And that's really good. If you want to try and get pseudo macro shots on this, you can get very, very close up and almost have it as a macro lens, which again I quite like. 25mm isn't necessarily the best focal length for macros in my opinion. I like a longer focal length, but if you just want it as an occasional thing to get really close up, this is ideal. And being a fully manual lens isn't really going to be too much of a problem for things like the autofocus, because when I've been shooting on macro, I tend to switch the autofocus off or have it stopped down to a narrow range. So I don't find that too much of a problem being a manual lens. What I'll tend to do is I'll focus it fully in, and then I'll move myself until I get the focus or whatever I'm doing as a real close-up. Now dimensions is 59.9 millimeters by 37.8 millimeters, and it has a pretty industry standard 46mm filter thread. Now it's not a huge lens, but it's not super small either. Remember, it is meant as an APS-C lens rather than dedicated micro four thirds, so it's got to be wide enough to be able to fill an APS-C frame, a 1.5 to 1 frame rather than a 1 to 2 frame that you've got on micro four thirds. So of course this on a micro four thirds gives the equivalent width of field of being a 50mm, so it's a reasonably long lens, long general lens. Optically, 7 lenses in 5 groups, so 7 lenses in 5 groups. And what I really do like, it's got 12 aperture blades on the iris, so 12 aperture blades. I haven't really played around with this in super low light conditions for really bokeh conditions, but with 12 aperture blades it should give a really nice, clean, rounded sort of display. It's something I'd have to have a look at and play with properly. I haven't had the opportunity to here, but I think it should, with those many lens blades, it should really give you a nice aperture. And as I say, field of view 68 degrees if it's used on APS-C. So that's pretty much the lens itself. Fully manual focus and fully manual aperture, of course. And I found it fairly easy to use. I just put it on yesterday when I was going around the campsite. We're away down at Barnard Castle at the moment. So as I just wandered around the campsite, not taking photographs of anything special, but I just thought I'd go out and try the lens and see what I can get. And I'll show you those photographs if you keep watching till the end. But one thing to bear in mind when you're watching those at the end, there is a flaw with this lens in my opinion. But I'll take a step back. If you remember, I did a review on the TT Artisan 50mm and also the Exxon 4mm fisheye lens from 7Artisans, and I was knocked out by them. I do enjoy taking photographs with manual lenses, but they are slower. You can't take anything at speed on them. You've got to take your time a little bit to really get it right. But there are situations where you really want things to go smoothly. If you are against it, you don't want problems. Well, I found a bit of a problem on this lens, which, and I think other people have as well by seeing some of the other reviews online. And that is that when you take it out to infinity, well, first of all, one problem is when you take it out to infinity, you actually have to back it up a little bit to get things at a distance in focus. Infinity doesn't seem to be infinity. And you'll find that there's a couple of shots where you'll see effectively the same sort of shot. And you'll see that what I did is I just took it out to infinity, took the photograph, and it's out of focus. And even when you back it up a little bit, I found the focus very difficult to keep track of. Now it does seem to have a fairly sizable focus breathing problem. Now, fair enough on when you're using things with automatic focus and things, that can become a problem, and it is easier to get round on manual lenses. But one of the ways that I do a lens, especially on the modern cameras, the modern mirrorless cameras, is I'll focus as best I can. I'll really try and get it in focus with it fully open. Then I'll stop it down to get what I want insofar as the f-stop number. And I've found when I'm doing that, I do tend to get something of a focus breathing issue. So as I turn the aperture, I suddenly find that it's out of focus and I have to try and refocus it. Not something which is really conducive to giving you a bit of confidence in the lens. And there's a few shots, you'll find that there's one of a smallish caravan that I took, which are both actually slightly out of focus in themselves, but one noticeably so, yet they were both focused in exactly the same way, except I didn't shut the aperture down, open the aperture out on the more in focus one, should we say. So it is a little bit of an issue for me, and when I've been looking at some of the reviews online, people have said that it appears to be losing focus when they have just focused it up properly. And I'm wondering if they've got the same sort of issues as I had insofar as how they do the photographs. Of course, when I used to use my fully manual film cameras, my original E-M1, you had a focus prism inside, so you could line up the verticals on that, but you don't have it on this. You're looking for focus peaking, and sometimes you need that little bit of extra light to get that. So that was a real downer for me. And that came across fairly quickly, although it took me some working out to find out what was wrong. Again, as I say, when I played with the 4mm super wide angle on this from 7Artisans, I was knocked out by it. From taking it out of the box, it just felt right. There was a real feel-good factor on that, and I didn't get that on this lens. On this one, I took it out, and there was always something which just didn't gel properly with me, and that really saddens me, because these lenses generally are very, very good. I've been looking forward to playing with this 25mm lens. It's a good focal length to use. It's a really enjoyable lens to use, and this should take me to the this should take me to the sweet spot of what we normally got insofar as your normal lens. So I was rather disappointed on that for the start on there. However, it was made up for in the other parts of the lens, as I say, with the construction and the general build quality being excellent. Now, like I said, on the previous 7Artisans lens, and again on the TT Artisan lens, I know they're different companies, but they fall into similar categories for me. The packaging on these lenses is absolutely outstanding. And for the price of the lens, to get packaging of this quality is really good. The only worry I have is, does it tend to be a little bit of a red herring? You get such a good box and the lens isn't so good. Well, overall, I can say that I don't find that to be the case. Yes, this lens I've just described a couple of problems, but it's still a very, very good lens. Optics on this are really nice. The colour rendition and the contrast is really good. So I don't think you're getting a bad lens at all. The only problem with those boxes is I tend to want to keep them, to keep everything nice. I keep boxes for camera gear anyway. I keep boxes for most of my gear, just so that if I do move it on to somebody, it's as pristine as possible. But what I tend to find is I've got a whole load of these really nice boxes which just take room up. I find the same thing for iPhones. I've had several iPhones, and the packaging on iPhones is always outstanding. But by the time I actually get rid of the phone, it's not worth selling on. So I have all these wonderful boxes stacked up with which aren't used. And I do worry sometimes if that's the case with this. Would I be wanting to sell a $68 lens on to really make any money back? Probably not. So the packaging, although very nice, well, it could be a little bit of a red herring. It could be a little bit of a sweetener to try and get you just to buy the lens. So what's my overall conclusions on this lens? Well, I actually quite like it. I do quite like it, but I will find it difficult to live with these problems. Now, as I say, this one isn't my lens, and I'll be giving it back to the owner very, very soon. And I don't think I would be regretting it. Would I buy one? I'll be honest with you, no. If I was going to be buying one of these, I bought an adapter for Micro Four Thirds to normal Olympus, the original sort of film type Olympus lenses a little while ago. I think it cost me about £15. And I've got my little 25mm f1.8 Olympus, my Zuiko lens, which came with my camera all those years ago. And I think I would prefer using that to this one. It's got the clicks on the side. It's a really well-built all-metal lens, and you can pick those up for peanuts on the internet. And I think that's what I would do rather than invest in this. So although it's only an inexpensive 68mm lens, it's still not the best deal for me. And I would rather go for that Olympus kit lens which came with my camera all those years ago. The other thing is as well, yes, the original Olympus lens isn't super sharp. But I've mentioned this on a couple of other videos recently, insofar as I do find some of the current lenses a little bit clinical. A little bit too sharp at times, and I do find that some of the older lenses give a really nice sort of softness, especially taking portrait work. However, I would still suggest, if you get the chance, try this lens, see what you think about it, and let me know in the comments below what you do think about it. Do you have this lens? Have you encountered any of those problems? Again, let me know at the bottom. And before I leave this, don't forget there's a whole bunch of people here who are my Patreon patrons. I knew I'd get it right in the end. My Patreon patrons. They get another look up here. I've got twice because I must have the first time. I am indebted to them, as well as the people who give the one-off donations to the channel, for keeping this channel going. So thank you all. And by the time you see this on YouTube, they'll have watched it a couple of weeks earlier as well. So maybe it's worth you becoming a patron and helping the channel out a little bit more as well. The other thing is, if you reach this far, then you obviously I'm quite keen on what I've been doing. So if you're not a subscriber on my YouTube channel, please hit the subscribe button below, because it really does help. We're at about 8,600 subscribers and I'm desperate to get to 10,000. So if you can help me do that, it costs you absolutely nothing. It's got no responsibility on you at all. It just puts my videos up so you can see them. So consider hitting the subscribe button below. Till the next time, this is Brian James, that Micro Four Thirds guy, saying keep on taking your camera out, keep on having fun with your photos. Bye bye.